This backyard belongs to Walter Brooks, a 65-year-old Vietnam War veteran who's hosted a charity barbecue here for 15 years to help homeless veterans. But a group of fake HOA cops showed up, called it a noise violation, and tried to shut it down, destroying tables and threatening Walter in front of his guests. They didn't know Walter is a war hero with friends in high places, and he wasn't about to let them ruin his mission. This is HOA Karen Files, where we expose the scams that hurt our heroes. Ever had a fake HOA ruin a good cause? Share your story in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell for more. Let's dive into how Walter fought back and turned the tables on these con artists. Walter Brooks, 65, lived in a modest ranch-style house in a small suburban neighborhood in San Antonio, Texas. The house wasn't much to look at: faded siding, a cracked driveway, and a lawn that was more dirt than grass. But the backyard was a different story. It was Walter's pride and joy, a wide-open space with a large barbecue grill, picnic tables, and a small stage where local bands played every summer. For the past 15 years, Walter had hosted an annual charity barbecue there, raising money for homeless veterans through the local VFW, Veterans of Foreign Wars, chapter. The event was a neighborhood tradition, drawing dozens of families, veterans, and supporters who came to eat, laugh, and honor those who'd served. Walter was a Vietnam War veteran himself, having served as a medic in 1970. He'd been awarded a Purple Heart after saving 3 soldiers under heavy fire, taking shrapnel to his leg in the process. The injury left him with a permanent limp, but it never slowed him down. After returning home, he'd spent decades working as a mechanic, but his true passion was helping other veterans. "I saw too many guys come back broken," he'd often say, his voice gruff but warm. "If I can give them a hot meal or a place to sleep, that's what I'm going to do." The barbecue had raised over $50,000 in 15 years, funding shelters, food drives, and job training programs for veterans across Texas. On a sunny Saturday in June, Walter was in his element. The barbecue was in full swing, smoke rising from the grill as he flipped burgers, kids running around with balloons, and a country band playing Sweet Home Alabama on the stage. American flags fluttered in the breeze, and a banner over the stage read, "15th Annual Veterans Barbecue. Support our heroes." About 50 people were there, including veterans in their old service caps, families with homemade pies, and a few local business owners who donated supplies. Walter moved through the crowd with a smile, shaking hands, and thanking everyone for coming. "We're at $3,000 already," he told his friend Jim, a fellow vet who helped organize the event. "Let's make this the best year yet." The mood shifted when a black SUV pulled up to the curb. 3 people stepped out, 2 men and a woman, all wearing black vests with HOA enforcement in bold white letters. The woman, who introduced herself as Denise Carter, carried a clipboard and a megaphone. She marched into the backyard without asking, her voice booming through the megaphone. "This event is in violation of Cedar Hills HOA regulations," she shouted, causing the music to stop and heads to turn. "You're exceeding noise limits and hosting an unapproved gathering. Shut it down now, or pay a $3,000 fine." Walter limped over, his brow furrowed. "Cedar Hills HOA? I've lived here 30 years. There's no HOA in this neighborhood. This is a charity event for veterans. You've got no right to be here." Denise smirked, handing Walter a letter stamped with a fake logo. "Cedar Hills HOA was established last year to oversee this area," she said. "You're under our jurisdiction now. Pay the fine, or we'll call the police." One of the men, a stocky guy named Greg, started kicking over a picnic table, sending plates of food crashing to the ground. The other man, whose name tag read Paul, poured a bucket of water onto the grill, dousing the flames and sending a cloud of steam into the air. "You heard her, old man," Greg sneered. "Pack it up, or we'll make you." The crowd gasped, some veterans stepping forward to intervene, but Walter raised a hand to stop them. "Don't give them a reason," he said, his voice steady despite the anger in his eyes. "I'll handle this." Walter's heart sank as he watched the chaos unfold. This barbecue wasn't just a fundraiser. It was a lifeline for veterans who had nothing, a way for Walter to honor the brothers he'd lost in Vietnam. He thought of his friend Tommy, who'd died in his arms on a muddy battlefield, and all the others who'd come home only to end up on the streets. "You're not shutting this down," he said, his voice low but firm. Get off my property. Denise laughed, a cold, mocking sound. You've got 24 hours to pay, she said, or we'll be back with a tow truck to clear this junk out. The group got back in their SUV and drove off, leaving Walter standing in his ruined backyard, the smell of wet charcoal heavy in the air. That evening, Walter called his old friend, Captain Mark Reynolds, a high-ranking officer in the San Antonio Police Department. Mark had served with Walter in Vietnam and owed him his life. Walter had pulled him out of a burning helicopter during an ambush. Mark, I've got a problem, Walter said, explaining the incident. They say they're from an HOA, but I've never heard of Cedar Hills. They trash my barbecue, and I'm not letting them stop me. Mark's voice was grim. Sounds like a scam, Walt. I've heard of fake HOAs targeting folks around here. I'll look into it. Don't do anything rash. Walter nodded, but he wasn't about to sit idle. He'd fought in a war. He wasn't going to let a bunch of con artists ruin his mission. Walter spent the night cleaning up the backyard, his bad leg aching as he swept up broken plates and mopped up the water-soaked grill. The banner over the stage was torn, and several chairs had been smashed, but the worst damage was to his spirit. He kept replaying the moment Greg kicked over the table, the way Denise had laughed as Paul doused the grill. They don't care, Walter muttered to himself, his hands shaking with anger. They don't care who they hurt. But Walter wasn't the type to give up. He'd survived ambushes, mortar fire, and the loss of too many friends. He wasn't about to let a group of scammers stop him. The next morning, Mark Reynolds showed up at Walter's house, still in his police uniform from an overnight shift. He brought a file with him, his expression serious. You were right, Walt, he said, spreading the papers on the kitchen table. There's no Cedar Hills HOA registered with the county. I ran the plates on that SUV. It's registered to a company called Horizon Property Management, but the address is a vacant lot in Austin. These guys are fakes, and they've been hitting other neighborhoods, too. Mark explained that Horizon was likely a front for a larger scam, targeting homeowners with fake fines to extort money or force them to sell their properties at a loss. Walter's jaw tightened. They picked the wrong guy to mess with, he said. This barbecue is for my brothers, guys who've got nothing left. I'm not paying them a dime, and I'm not shutting it down. Mark nodded, a small smile on his face. I figured you'd say that. I've got a plan. We'll set up a sting, let them come back, catch them in the act. I'll have my team ready to move in. But we need evidence they're breaking the law. Walter agreed, his mind already racing. He'd dealt with worse enemies than this in Vietnam. He could handle a few con artists. Walter decided to go ahead with the barbecue, but this time, he'd be ready. He called Jim and the other volunteers, explaining the situation and asking them to spread the word. Tell everyone to come back tomorrow, he said. We're not letting these punks win. He also reached out to a local news station, KNS5, tipping them off about the scam. I've got a story for you, he told the reporter, a young woman named Lisa. Fake HOA cops are trying to shut down a veterans charity event. I'm a Purple Heart recipient, and I'm not backing down. Lisa was intrigued, promising to send a camera crew to the barbecue the next day. That afternoon, Walter and Jim set up a few hidden cameras around the backyard, one near the grill, another by the stage, and a third at the entrance to the property. If they show up, we'll have them on tape, Jim said, testing the angles. Walter nodded, his eyes scanning the yard. He thought about the veterans who'd be there tomorrow, guys like Eddie, who'd lost his leg in Iraq and now lived in a shelter, or Maria, a Gulf War vet who'd been sleeping in her car until Walter's fundraiser helped her get an apartment. This isn't just about me, Walter said, his voice low. It's about them. The next day, the barbecue was back in full swing. Walter fired up the grill, the smell of burgers and hot dogs filling the air. The band played Proud to Be an American, and the crowd, bigger than the day before, clapped along, determined to support Walter. Lisa and her camera crew arrived, setting up near the stage to film the event. Walter gave a short interview, his voice steady as he explained the scam. These people tried to shut us down with fake fines, he said, holding up the letter from Denise. But we're not stopping. This is for our veterans. The crowd cheered, waving small American flags. Right on cue, the black SUV pulled up. Denise, Greg, and Paul stepped out, their vests on, their faces smug. Denise marched into the backyard, megaphone in hand. You were warned, Mr. Brooks, she shouted. This event is over. Pay the fine, or we're calling the cops. Greg grabbed a chair and smashed it against the ground, while Paul started unplugging the band's speakers, causing a screech of feedback. The crowd booed, some veterans stepping forward, but Walter raised a hand. "Let them dig their own grave," he said, his eyes locked on Denise. The hidden cameras captured everything: the threats, the destruction, the sneers. Walter stepped forward, his purple heart pinned to his shirt. "You're on private property," he said, his voice calm but firm. "And you're being recorded. I know you're not a real HOA. Horizon Property Management doesn't exist. Leave now, or you'll regret it." Denise's smirk faltered, but she tried to bluff her way out. "You can't prove anything," she said. "We'll have this place shut down by tomorrow." That's when Mark Reynolds and his team moved in, for police cars pulling up with lights flashing. "San Antonio PD," Mark shouted, his badge gleaming. "You're under arrest for extortion, vandalism, and impersonating an HOA." The crowd erupted in cheers as Denise, Greg, and Paul were handcuffed and led to the police cars. Lisa's camera crew caught it all, the footage destined to make the evening news. Walter stood in the middle of his backyard, his chest swelling with pride. He'd fought for his country once, and now he'd fought for his community, and won. With Denise, Greg, and Paul in custody, Mark Reynolds and his team began digging into Horizon Property Management. The arrests were just the beginning. Mark suspected this was part of a larger operation, and he was right. Using the footage from Walter's cameras and the fake HOA letter, the police traced Horizon to a man named Carl Dempsey, a 48-year-old with a rap sheet that included fraud, identity theft, and money laundering. Carl had set up Horizon as a front to target homeowners in growing suburban areas, extorting money with fake fines or pressuring them to sell their properties to developers at below-market prices. Walter, meanwhile, was the talk of the town. The KNS 5 News segment aired that evening, showing the dramatic arrests and Walter's interview. "This man is a hero," Lisa said on air, holding up a photo of Walter in his Vietnam uniform, his purple heart gleaming. "He fought for our country, and now he's fighting for his community." The story spread quickly, picked up by national outlets like Fox News and Military Times. Social media lit up with hashtags like #JusticeForWalter and #SupportVeteransBBQ, as people shared their own stories of HOA scams and praised Walter's courage. But Walter wasn't done. He wanted to know why Horizon had targeted him, and how many others had been hurt. He sat down with Mark the next day, going through the evidence. "We found a list of targets in their SUV," Mark said, showing Walter a spreadsheet. "Your name was on it, along with a dozen others in this area. They picked you because your property is on a big lot, prime real estate for a new subdivision." Walter's jaw tightened. "They thought I'd be an easy mark," he said. "An old vet, living alone. They didn't count on me fighting back." Mark nodded. "We also found emails between Carl Dempsey and a developer named Horizon Realty Group. They've been working together. Carl scares people into selling, and the developer buys the land cheap, then flips it for a profit." Walter's eyes narrowed. "So they're not just scammers, they're stealing people's homes." Mark agreed, promising to take the case to the district attorney. "We're going after the whole operation," he said. "But we need more victims to come forward. Your story might encourage them." Walter decided to use his platform to help. He worked with Lisa to organize a press conference in his backyard, inviting other victims of Horizon to share their stories. The event was a success. Over 20 people showed up, including a 70-year-old woman named Clara, who'd paid Horizon $2,000 to avoid losing her home, and a young couple, the Martins, who'd sold their house at a loss after months of harassment. "They showed up every week, banging on our door," Mrs. Martin said, tears in her eyes. "We couldn't take it anymore." Walter listened, his heart heavy. "You're not alone anymore," he told them. "We're fighting this together." The press conference was a turning point. More victims came forward, giving the police enough evidence to build a case against Carl Dempsey and Horizon Realty Group. Walter's barbecue became a rallying point, a symbol of resistance against the scam. He decided to host another event the following weekend, this time inviting the media, local politicians, and even the mayor of San Antonio. "We're not just raising money for veterans," Walter told Jim as they set up. "We're showing these scammers they can't win." The second barbecue was a massive success, drawing over 200 people and raising $10,000 in a single day. Veterans shared their stories on the stage, some breaking down as they talked about the struggles of coming home. Walter watched from the grill, his eyes misty. He thought about Tommy, about the promise he'd made to never let his brothers down. "We did it, man," he whispered, looking up at the sky. "We're taking care of them." The legal battle against Horizon Property Management and Horizon Realty Group moved quickly. With the evidence from Walter's cameras, the victim testimonies, and the documents found in the SUV, the district attorney charged Carl Dempsey with racketeering, fraud, and extortion. Denise, Greg, and Paul were charged as accomplices, facing up to 5 years in prison each. The developer, Horizon Realty Group, was hit with a civil lawsuit for conspiracy to commit fraud, with the DA seeking to seize their assets to compensate the victims. Walter became a local celebrity, his story inspiring others to stand up against scams. The Military Times ran a feature on him, titled "Purple Heart Vet Takes Down Fake HOA Scam," and he was invited to speak at a VFW convention in Dallas. "I didn't do this for me," he told the crowd, his Purple Heart pinned to his shirt. "I did it for the guys who can't fight back, the ones sleeping on the streets, the ones who've lost everything. We've got to look out for each other." The audience gave him a standing ovation, many veterans wiping tears from their eyes. Back in San Antonio, the community rallied around Walter. The mayor declared the day of the second barbecue Walter Brooks Day, honoring his service to both his country and his neighbors. Local businesses donated supplies for future BBQs, and a veterans advocacy group offered to sponsor the event every year, ensuring it would continue for decades to come. "You've given us a reason to come together," a young vet named Carlos told Walter, shaking his hand. "I've been on the streets for 2 years. This is the first time I've felt like I belong somewhere." The trial against Carl Dempsey was a media circus, with news crews camped outside the courthouse. Walter testified, his voice steady as he recounted the day of the barbecue. "They came into my home, threatened me, and tried to stop a charity event for homeless veterans," he said, his eyes locked on Carl. "They didn't care who they hurt. They just wanted money." The jury was visibly moved, especially when Walter showed them a photo of the barbecue banner, torn and muddy after the attack. Carl's defense tried to paint him as a small-time operator, but the evidence was overwhelming. After a week-long trial, the jury found him guilty on all counts, sentencing him to 12 years in prison. Denise, Greg, and Paul took plea deals, testifying against Carl in exchange for reduced sentences. They each received 3 years, with orders to pay restitution to the victims. Horizon Realty Group settled the civil suit for $3 million, with the money distributed among the victims. Walter used his share to fund a new shelter for homeless veterans, naming it Tommy's Haven, after his fallen friend. "This is what the barbecue was always about," he said at the shelter's opening, cutting the ribbon with a pair of old military scissors. "Taking care of our own." The aftermath of the trial sent shockwaves through the real estate industry. Developers across Texas were forced to audit their practices, and lawmakers introduced a bill called Walter's Law, making it a felony to impersonate an HOA with intent to defraud. The law also established a task force to investigate real estate scams, with Mark Reynolds appointed as its head. "This wouldn't have happened without you, Walt," Mark said, clapping his friend on the shoulder. Walter smiled, his eyes crinkling. "I just did what I had to do," he said. "For my brothers." In the months that followed, Walter's barbecue became a symbol of hope and resilience. The event grew bigger each year, drawing veterans from across the state and raising tens of thousands of dollars for homeless vets. Walter expanded the backyard, adding more picnic tables and a permanent stage, with a plaque that read, "Walter Brooks Veterans Barbecue, honoring our heroes." The shelter, Tommy's Haven, became a lifeline for veterans in need, offering not just beds but job training, counseling, and a sense of community. "This place saved my life," a vet named Sarah said at the shelter's 1-year anniversary, her voice trembling. "I was on the streets for 3 years. Now I've got a job, a home, and a family again." Walter's story inspired broader change. Walter's Law passed with overwhelming support, and similar laws were proposed in other states, including California and Florida. Advocacy groups used Walter's story to raise awareness about real estate scams, distributing flyers with tips on how to spot fake HOAs and protect property rights. "Walter Brooks showed us what's possible," a VFW leader said at a rally. "He fought for his community, and now we're fighting for every veteran out there. The neighborhood around Walter's house changed, too. Neighbors who'd once kept to themselves started looking out for each other, forming a tight-knit community that met monthly to discuss ways to support veterans. They organized food drives, volunteered at Tommy's Haven, and made sure no one in the area felt alone. Walter brought us together. A neighbor named Linda sat at a block party, raising a glass of lemonade. He reminded us what it means to be a community. For Walter, the greatest reward was the barbecue itself. On the 16th anniversary of the event, he stood at the grill, flipping burgers as the band played "God Bless the USA." The crowd was the biggest yet, over 300 people, including veterans, families, and even a few politicians who'd come to show their support. Walter looked out at the sea of faces, his heart full. He thought about Tommy, about the promise he'd made all those years ago. "We're doing it, man," he whispered, his eyes misty. "We're taking care of them." Mark Reynolds, now a close friend, stood beside him, his police badge gleaming. "You're a hero, Walt," he said, clapping him on the shoulder. "You always have been." Walter smiled, his limp a little less noticeable today. "I'm just a guy with a grill," he said. "But if I can make a difference, that's all that matters." The crowd cheered as Walter raised a spatula in the air, the American flags fluttering in the breeze. The barbecue wasn't just an event anymore. It was a legacy, a testament to the power of brotherhood and the strength of a man who refused to back down. Walter Brooks turned a charity barbecue into a movement, taking down a group of fake HOA cops who thought they could bully a veteran into submission. They didn't know he was a war hero with a community behind him, and a legacy to protect. Now, Walter's story is saving lives, from homeless veterans to homeowners across the country. This is HOA Karen Files, where we fight for the heroes who fight for us. Have you or someone you know been targeted by a fake HOA? Tell me in the comments. I read every one. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you don't miss the next story. We'll see you soon, and let's keep honoring our heroes.